terms of strategy,
Yeah.
the role of labor right now, and the fact that initially when this war started, there was an idea like, well, why would this random union be issuing a ceasefire statement? And now when you have the UAW issuing this statement saying we're going to be looking into our factories that might be, creating or aiding in weapons that are being sent to Israel. I mean, this is although they're not saying it, some BDS, action here, or the beginnings of something. So I'm curious, and you wrote a piece about, labor's role in this. What do you see as the importance of labor right now and when it comes to
So it's important for people to realize that labor has always been divided on foreign policy.
Mhm.
Always, going back to the Spanish-American War, and then the Spanish Civil War in the 30s, the Vietnam War, Central America, South Africa, right? So there's always been divisions. What we're seeing now, in that sense, is not unprecedented. What is different, however, is that you have unions that are willing to speak up in opposition to Israel. And this has been really very rare. So this is brilliant. This is brilliant. Now, can they stay with us? I'm hoping. But the other part of it, which is what I'm actually concerned about, is that with the rise of this kind of post-fascist movement, the MAGA folks, what you don't see is organized labor stepping forward with a very clear stand against the rise of the right-wing authoritarianism.
Right.
And educating the members, but also engaging the members. See, this is why I think why I want to talk about strategy and tactics. For example, we need union members that get mobilized so that when these fascists show up at school committee meetings, for instance, we have double the number of people there on our side that are basically saying, hell no, we're not going to be banning books. When there's further attempts to squash a woman's right to control her body, that you have people from our side that's saying, hell no, we're not going to tolerate this.
And you see unions as like this vehicle,
absolutely,
a built-in community that can also do work around not just workplace things and not just contract negotiations, but actually play this more pivotal role more broadly.
It's what I call social justice unionism. That's what we need to be standing for. And recognizing, of course, that unions are not political parties, that unions are not monolithic. They're going to be differences of opinion.
Sure.
As long as we respect those differences, don't treat the members like idiots. Don't treat them like you're going to tell them what to do. Encourage debate, build a consensus, and then move on it. You're not going to have a unanimous agreement. But this is the time to act. And so I think that the steps that the UAW, the National Nurses United, the American Postal Workers Union, and a number of other unions have taken, that's what needs to be supported.
The postal workers came out for a ceasefire.
American Postal Workers Union was one of the first, and the president, Mark Dimondstein, found himself, as it was reported, very isolated in an AFL-CIO executive committee meeting, but nevertheless took a very strong, very courageous stand. I'm extremely proud of him.
They're like, look, even the Postal Service has a few ceasefires. I'm trying to make we have a pause in our delivery, so there should be a pause in the delivery of weapons. There we go. There's something there. No, when I read that, I was like, shut up, Will. Shut up, Will. I'm taking you out of the stream right now. Bye. When I read that, I was like, damn. And I think it seems ridiculous to people, but it is in the same way that like churches have stood up. Like the Presbyterian Church of America has said that they won't invest in any companies that work in the occupied territories, like, and participate in BDS. Like, they are organizing forces. They are centers in their community. They can weigh in on these questions, and I think more should. I mean, I'm incredibly heartened by that.
Yes, absolutely. And there will be more. That I know. There will be more. And particularly when there's ferment at the base, the leaders are feeling more and more compelled to speak up. And it's really hard when you watch the news. I mean, unless you're a complete almost like a sociopath. When you watch what's happening in Gaza, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that there's a problem here. Now, one of the things I got challenged on by a Zionist was, so just like the United States had to carry out fire bombings of Yokohama and Dresden, the Israelis have to do what they're doing in Gaza. And I pointed out that what the US did in Yokohama, Dresden, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, those were war crimes.
Yeah.
It just happened that the United States won the war. So no one was taking them to court. But
Right.
also a lot of laws changed in the 1940s in terms of laws of war, human rights, etc. So one cannot just simply go back and say, well, because the US blasted Dresden, that we have a right. I mean, if you leaving the morality aside, what's interesting is that
And the irony.
those fire bombings did not help to end the war. Right? It did not help. And so this, what Israel is doing, they're not going to militarily destroy Hamas. Even if they did, there would be a new one.
They know they won't. I mean, I think the sickest excuse I've heard from, I mean, basically what Zionists are saying is, well, we need to have our Nagasaki. Like, why can't we have our Hiroshima? In effect, this colonial power, this Western colonial power wants to prove itself as such by having their own massive war crime, by having their Nagasaki and Hiroshima and getting away with it, and having, and that is chilling.
Yes, it is.
The idea of comparing the Gaza Strip to Imperial Japan up to the 1940s is so crazy. Like an imperial power with such a like nauseating like legacy of like violence and repression and like the most brutal crimes against innocent people. And again, it's like, and yes, and they are very similar to the 15,000 guys in tunnels with like homemade RPGs that they're shooting at tanks on GoPros.
Right.
Like it's absolutely.
It's such an absurd comparison.
And it leaves out the entire history of how we got there. I mean, on October 7th, or actually on October 8th, when I in the aftermath of the initial Hamas-led attack, I wrote and said to some people, this was inevitable. It was just a matter of time. And anyone that was surprised by this was a fool or asleep, because the provocations by Netanyahu were so clear. He wanted this to happen.
Now, they also knew it was going to for about a year, but we still have to talk about that.
That's right. Now, I'm certainly not going to justify at all the war crimes that Hamas committed, but the fact that there was an attack that took place, it was inevitable. The people of Gaza were being squeezed into non-existence. Everybody knew this. That is so completely different than any analogy, as you're saying, Will, with Germany, Italy, or Japan in World War II. It just defies any comparison.
100%. I think. Go ahead, Will. What?
I also years and years ago, God, I think it was Nathan J. Robinson. I heard him talking about being a pacifist and how people be like, "Oh, well, pacifist, you think we just should have let Germany win World War II?" And it's like, no, as a pacifist, I think we never should have created the conditions that led to the rise of Nazi Germany. Like, you can't, like, people want to start history at the points where it's incredibly easy to make these simplistic arguments. So you're like, well, no. And yeah, like you said, it's like saying, well, what did you expect is not the same as saying, well, I'm glad that it happened. And it is like, you treat people like this. You treat people worse than you would treat a dog. And how do you think they're going to react to that eventually?
That's right.
I think that one thing we've been talking about on the show, Naomi Klein was on, and she talked about, look, the war crimes were committed by Hamas, and we need to call them such. And I think that was a really important point. Since then, I have been speaking also to, friends of mine, Muslim Americans who say to me, but Israel's been skirting the law, the international law, when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians for so long. So it is really, yes, it's important to call what Hamas did a war crime, killing innocent people. But it also is so sick because the people who have been completely flaunting international law that is, called their occupation what it is, asked them, to remove settlements, all of this
Right.
is Israel itself.
That's
So
right.
it must be applied equally. And if it is flaunted equally, then, like, of course, they should not be trusted. Like, it's just, and again, we talk about our way forward for a progressive vision for international policy and international relations. It does go through the UN, and if it goes through the UN, then it starts with holding Israel accountable to the United Nations. And the many times the United Nations has said that they are in violation of international law,
Right.
including what South Africa is now saying. So it's so funny, Bill, because I've been, like you said, it hasn't been an issue. People haven't really paid attention. Will, you said the same thing. It's like Fetterman thinks he can get elected and not talk about it. And now I feel like actually all roads go through Palestine.
Mhm.
Every single one of them. Let's start here, Like, this should be the starting point.
So I'm in agreement with you. Let me just put a qualifier in there, though. One of the reasons that I think it's important to talk about the Hamas atrocities
Mm-hmm.
is that we are fighting a struggle at a global level. The Palestinian struggle, much like the Vietnamese struggle, became a global struggle. The entire world is watching. And so, on the one hand, as you said, Israel has been committing one breach of international law after another and getting away with it. And we've got to call them on it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to keep in mind is that when the oppressed are fighting back, they're watched very carefully. And how they play things out becomes important, not just at the level of morality, but at the level of building a broad front. So here's an example. During the Vietnam War, this guy named John McCain was shot down over North Vietnam. And as he admitted, the Vietnamese peasants wanted to slice and dice him.
Right.
He was saved by the National North Vietnamese Army. They were the ones that saved him. Now, had the Vietnamese army allowed the peasants to slice him up, that would have been completely understandable on one level because of the atrocities that the U.S. was committing in Vietnam. So at one level, people would have understood it. But at the level of influencing the globe, what the North Vietnamese did was brilliant. It was brilliant because that's what gets remembered. When the ANC, when the African National Congress made a decision about not attacking civilians, it wasn't just about morality. It's that they recognized they were fighting a battle on a global stage.
Yes.
Think about for a second.
But a battle, I do think, like, I think that the South Africa comparison is much more apropos just because it's also, the ANC did not have an army, just like, Palestinians do not have an army.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess I lost. What were you saying? What were you go, Bill.
I'm saying that it's a fight for public opinion, global public opinion. And that's what the ANC, that's what the Vietnamese, that's what successful revolutionary movements have.
And yet, what I was gonna push back on that is that only when there is violence do folks pay attention to what's going on in Gaza.
I didn't say about violence. I said attacking civilians.
Right.
There's a difference, right? I'm talking about violating the rules of war.
Right.
That oppressed people have every right to engage in armed struggle for resistance. Think about for a second, if the Hamas-led attack on October 7th had only hit military targets,
right?
What kind of discussion do you think we might be having right now?
The same one. No, it would have been different, not from a propaganda standpoint, but you're right. No, you're absolutely right. I think so. I mean, again, I don't think that should change how we feel about the ongoing ethnic cleansing or genocide, but I agree with you.
Absolutely.
I agree with you, and it is sort of instructive for the future.
Yes.
which this will all continue to play out. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.